In 1824, 3 years after Mexico won its independence from Spain, the new nation enacted its constitution, modeled in part on that of the United States. It set up a nation in which former Spanish provinces became states. Los Estados Unidos Mexicanos, the Mexican United States. Guadalupe Victoria was the first president, and the first to confront the Texas problem. The influx of Americans under the impresario system should have stabilized the territory, but instead, it made the Mexicans apprehensive.
There's always a concern in Mexico City that if you scratched the skin of a peaceful American colonist, what you might have just beneath the surface is a hostile filibuster. So, you know, they do have considerable justification for concern.
American designs on Texas came from Washington as well. President John Quincy Adams quietly offered Mexico $1 million for the troublesome state. Victoria turned down the money and assigned General Manuel de Mier y Terán to go to Texas and examine the state's potential for Mexico's future. There was something else as well.
The authorities in Mexico City said, look, while you're up there, keep your ear to the ground, because we are a tad suspicious of the intentions of some of these Anglo colonists.
The reports Mier y Terán sent back were not encouraging.
Foreign farmers settle where it suits them and take over whatever land they desire without approval. They all go about with their constitution in their pocket, demanding their rights. The predominance of North Americans will be the cause for the Mexican Federation to lose Texas unless measures are taken.
The bottom line, in Mier y Terán's view, Mexico had created a monster.
What you have is illegal aliens, and the concern for Mexican authorities is you just have no idea how many of these people we're talking about. But we know it's in the thousands.
Pressure continued from the north. When Andrew Jackson became president, he authorized another attempt to buy Texas. This time, the price was $5 million. The mere offer was a public relations disaster.
The idea that President Jackson wanted to purchase Texas was very disturbing, because what it tended to do was to tell people in Mexico that the United States wanted parts of their country.
Mexico was determined to hold on to all of its country and passed a tough new measure to do so. Based largely on Mier y Terán's reports, it was known simply as the Law of April 6, 1830.
It's an anti-immigration law. It's an attempt to stem this demographic tidal wave that is sweeping into Texas.
The irony, of course, is that even after the law of April 6, 1830, Americans continued to come into Texas, in this case as illegal aliens.
Mier y Terán hoped the new law would allow Mexico to benefit from the rich lands of Texas by stopping the flow of Americans, so Mexicans could develop the state for themselves. But he was frustrated. After President Victoria served out his term, a chaotic succession of leaders followed, as internal political disputes sapped Mexico's ability to hold on to Texas. On July 3, 1832, the despondent Manuel de Mier y Terán took his own life. He left behind a sad letter asking, "En qué parará Texas?" What will become of Texas? Perhaps the answer was more than this loyal Mexican could bear. That same year, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna entered the Alamo story when he unleashed a rebellion against then Mexican President Anastasio Bustamante. The bloody clash was fueled by competing political ideas: the federalism of Santa Anna and the centralism of Bustamante.
Centralism, on one hand, wants the power of government centralized in Mexico City, a strong central government. The Federalists, on the other hand, are suspicious of a centralized government and believe that the power of government ought to be disseminated among the states.
One of the Texian leaders who announced support for Santa Anna was none other than William Travis.
It no doubt seems odd, but at the time, Santa Anna proclaimed himself a Federalist, one in favor of the dissemination of power, the dilution of power to the local states, which is exactly what those early Texan leaders wanted.
Santa Anna was a skilled general and a hero of Mexico's fight for independence from Spain. He himself became Mexican president in 1833, advocating federalism. But then he changed. He suspended the Constitution of 1824, now seeing Federalist autonomy as a threat to the stability of Mexico and his own grip on power.
Santa Anna very quickly shifts from being a Federalist to a centralist to a dictator. And so those like Travis, who had once stood behind Santa Anna, are now, of course, going to be right in front of his guns.
Santa Anna's guns would also be aimed at Tejanos, Texans of Mexican birth. Their stake in the story made them passionate supporters of federalism. They were horrified that the Constitution would be voided by the president in Mexico City.
These were Tejano descendants of the founding families who identify with Texas, loyal to the land, not to a foreign government, whether it be in Mexico City, Madrid, or Washington, D.C.
Prominent among them was Juan Seguin, member of an old established San Antonio family, a man with close ties to his Anglo neighbors, especially impresario Stephen Austin.
At one point, Austin sent his younger brother to the Seguin household in San Antonio to learn Spanish, and at the same time, Seguin sent his son Juan to Austin's colony to learn English.
Even when Santa Anna became a dictator, most Texians and Tejanos at first avoided conflict with the central government. But public opinion shifted towards war when Santa Anna allowed his soldiers 2 days of rape and rampage after brutally crushing an uprising in the Mexican state of Zacatecas. The lesson wasn't lost on the Texans. They might be next.
In Zacatecas, one of the states of Mexico, just before the Texian uprising, hundreds, maybe thousands, were put to death as part of a failed revolution.
As tensions grew, Santa Anna's soldiers marched to the Texas town of Gonzales, where the locals had been given a cannon for use against Indian raids. The troops were ordered to take it back.
It's part of the centralist plan to rein in all the spare arms that are out there.
Let's face it, now American colonists pose a much greater threat to the Mexican government than Indians.
It was October 2nd, 1835. When the Centralists arrived, the Texians hoisted a flag. The message was clear. When the day was done, the Texians still had the cannon.
It's not a battle, it's hardly even a skirmish, but shots are fired, blood is shed, and after October the 2nd, for good or ill, we're committed. We are in revolt.
The Texas Revolution had suddenly begun. Encouraged by their early success, the rebels advanced. They went to San Antonio de Bejar, where they would target the Mexican garrison that patrolled its streets. Just outside town, the same garrison maintained the Alamo as a fort. In early December of 1835, 300 Texans battled 1,200 Mexicans. In 5 days of terrifying house-to-house fighting, the sharpshooting Texans killed 200 Mexican troops, while losing only 4 of their own. The Mexicans retreated to the shelter of the Alamo, and on December 9th surrendered. There was no vengeance. The Texans disarmed their enemies and sent them back to Mexico, demanding only the promise to fight no further in the war. The rising tensions in Texas and the outbreak of armed conflict was reported in the American press. This widespread coverage would change the nature of the Alamo battle and what it stood for.
Newspapers are the CNN of the day.
San Antonio was taken by the Texians on the 6th instant by 300.
When the Texans began revolting against Mexican rule, there are newspapers all throughout the East that are carrying the story, newspapers in the South that are carrying the story.
Volunteers were pouring in from all parts of the United States. A large amount of military...
Others are very quick to pick up on that, and when they read this, they're very eager to go participate.
Santa Anna will find the Kentucky riflemen bad troops to contend with.
The independence movement actually starts with some of the newer arrivals, people who did not have connections with the Mexican Federation.
Independence. That is right. Nothing but entire separation from the Mexicans.
The idea was, let's have a republic. That republic may exist on its own, or it can always fall back to the United States and become one of the states.
Thousands of independence-minded Americans took up arms and marched for Texas. Many of the Texan fighters who took San Antonio de Bejar returned to their homes after the battle, and thought was given to abandoning the Alamo. As rebel forces organized under a provisional government, Jim Bowie was assigned in January 1836 to inspect the Alamo to consider demolishing the cannon ramps and other fortifications Mexican soldiers had built inside the mission. Davy Crockett arrived in February, after Bowie had concluded that the Alamo was a strategic outpost that should be manned and defended. William Travis came as well. As a leader in the war movement, he had earned the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Texan Army. He and Bowie shared command of the Alamo. As the garrison grew to about 150 men, waiting for the Mexican armies they knew would be coming. But contrary to all expectations, Santa Anna had not waited until spring to launch his counterattack. He had already gathered his soldiers and begun the grueling 600-mile forced march across Mexico's northern deserts in late December 1835.
Santa Anna loved to brag that his army suffered greatly, that they knew how to suffer. And I believe that. I believe that his soldiers knew how to suffer. He made sure they did.
As many as 500 troops were lost along the way, but the forced march paid off. Centralist soldiers arrived in San Antonio de Bejar on February 23, 1836, weeks before they were expected. The Texas rebels headed into the Alamo for safety, and the die was cast for the battle to come.